22 Combinations of necessity and sufficiency. Recall that the possible combinations of statements about necessity and sufficiency are as follows. C1a is necessary for B. C2a is sufficient for B. C3a is not necessary for B. C4a is not sufficient for B. C5a is both necessary and sufficient for B. C6a is necessary, but not sufficient, for B. C7a is sufficient, but not necessary, for B. C8a is neither necessary nor sufficient for B. We have already dealt with C1, C4. We now turn to C5, C8. First, notice carefully that C1, C4 are less informative than C5, C8. For example, if I say A is necessary for B, and leave it at that, I am not saying whether A is sufficient for B, one way or the other. Similarly, if I say that J is a sophomore, and leave it at that, I have said nothing concerning whether K is a sophomore, one way or the other. Consider the following example of combination C5. E5 averaging at least 50 is both necessary and sufficient for passing. This is quite clearly the conjunction of a necessity statement and a sufficiency statement, as follows. Averaging at least 50 is necessary for passing, and averaging at least 50 is sufficient for passing. The latter is symbolized FP and FP. Reading this back into English, we obtain if I do not average at least 50, then I will not pass, and if do average at least 50, then I will pass. Next, consider the following example of combination C6. E6 taking all the exams is necessary, but not sufficient, for getting an A. This is a somewhat more complex conjunction. Taking all the exams is necessary for getting an A, but taking all the exams is not sufficient for getting an A, which is symbolized TA and TA. Reading this back into English, we obtain if I do not take all the exams, then I will not get an A, but it is not true that if I do take all the exams then I will get an A. Next, consider the following example of combination C7. E7 getting 100 on every exam is sufficient, but not necessary, for getting an A. This too is a conjunction. Getting 100 on every exam is sufficient for getting an A, but getting 100 on every exam is not necessary for getting an A, which is symbolized HA and HA. Reading this back into English, we obtain if I get a 100 on every exam, then I will get an A, but it is not true that if I do not get a 100 on every exam then I will not get an A. Finally, consider the following example of combination C8. E8 attending class is neither necessary nor sufficient for passing, which may be paraphrased as a complex conjunction. Attending class is not necessary for passing, and attending class is not sufficient for passing, which is symbolized AP and AP. Reading this back into English, we obtain it is not true that if I do not attend class then I will not pass, nor is it true that if I do attend class then I will pass,